truths to consider when facing temptation. Chapter 10, verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. The core of these two verses is that God will provide a way of escape from temptation. In our application, in our truths to consider, the first thing I want you to, if you're taking notes, to write down this: have some humility. Number one, have some humility. Don't say, oh, I would never do that. I would never fall like that. I would never give in to the type of thing that someone else is doing. When you see someone sin in a horrible way, don't become inflated at their downfall. I remember my own childhood when seeing my little brothers, I got in trouble a fair bit, but my brothers got in trouble much more than me. And I would see them being in trouble, and I would be off in the side kind of snickering like, glad that's not me. Didn't happen to me, or I didn't get caught. Any of those things, like having that sort of prideful disposition towards someone else, or even taking delight in seeing someone else get caught or get in trouble. That's not good. You are not righteous enough to have that type of attitude about someone else that you see stumbling and falling. So have humility. Remember where you would be, or where you used to be, apart from Christ. Have some humility. Self-righteousness is the shortcut to your own colossal collapse. Self-righteousness is the shortcut to your own mighty fall. When you think, oh, I am so good, I am so holy, I am so much better than those other people. Also keep this in mind, not just for yourself as an individual, but also as a church. Don't become inflated or puffed up thinking, oh, we are the best church ever. We wouldn't ever have any problems. Self-righteousness is the shortcut to your own collapse. Our text says, he who thinks he stands, take heed lest you fall. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. So have humility. Number 2. So point 1 in these application points to consider regarding temptation. First is humility. Secondly, remember that you are not alone. You are not alone. No matter how isolated you may feel, others have gone through this before. You are not the first person on earth. Period. There are other people that have lived a human life before you have. Secondly, you are not the first person to go through this thing that you're going through before. You're not as unique, you're not as special as you think you are. And this temptation that you struggle with is not unique. You're not the only person who is ever dealt with this particular type of temptation. Others have faced this before. When you feel like you're alone, when you feel isolated, or when you in fact are isolated, when you isolate yourself, or when you allow others to isolate you, that is another shortcut to disaster. The first is this pride. The second is isolation, cutting others off and saying, you know what? I'm just going to skip the church. I will be alone. I don't need Christians. They're all hypocrites anyway. I'm going to do my own thing. The fact of the matter is that others have gone through these things before, and they have valuable resources and wisdom, encouragement to help you. But beyond these other human sources of encouragement, which are very real and very important, remember our Lord Jesus, who is our high priest, and he is the type of high priest who can sympathize with our weakness because he was tempted in all points like we are, yet without sin. So remember, when you are feeling alone, when you're feeling abandoned by God, when you are frustrated with your circumstances, when these things before you seem to be severe mercies, as the old expression goes, this is a bad situation and you want out of it. Remember that Jesus has experienced some bad situations and he wanted out of it. He understands that feeling and he tells you, come to me. Come to me and find rest for your soul. You find in Jesus a sympathetic high priest, a merciful high priest who understands. And he has promised not to abandon you, not to leave you, but to be with you. And then thirdly, so number one, humility. Number two, you're not alone. Number three, remember the faithfulness of God. These are truths to consider when facing temptation. Truths to consider when facing temptation. Number three, remember the faithfulness of God. Our text says God is faithful. This is God's solution, which he offers to those who are overwhelmed by temptation. Himself. He says, I'm faithful. You're not faithful. Those other people you're dealing with are not faithful. Your circumstances are not faithful. Everything around you, what does it say? Though all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. When everything around you is falling to pieces, God is faithful. And it doesn't just say that God is faithful. It says more than that. In our text, we're in verse 12, 13. Verse 13. God is faithful, and there's a particular shape to that faithfulness, which says, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. God makes a way of escape when we are utterly at the end of our rope, when we are completely beyond our limits and our abilities to bear this temptation. God gives us a way out. He gives a release valve. And it comes in unexpected ways at unexpected times. But it comes just like that water that you so desperately needed when you were at the ball field and you feel like you're going to drop because you're so thirsty, and you either are searching through your backpack or a friend walks up and says, hey, here's some water, and you're like, thank you, I needed that. God makes a way of escape when we are utterly at the end of our rope. This, we talked about prayer recently on the Wednesday worship. The Puritans said that praying was pleading the promises of God. This is one of the promises of God that we should plead before him. We come before him and say, you promised, you told me you are faithful, and you would make a way of escape, a way out from this temptation. So God, I cry out to you, deliver me from evil. That's actually part of the Lord's Prayer. Deliver us from evil. Rescue me. God either takes you out of the situation, or he provides the presence of help in the time of temptation. But either way, he is telling us, he's told us, because he is faithful, he's there to help us. And that help may be supernatural, it may be something invisible, or it might be very visible and very human. In practical human terms, you're moving into a new apartment and you're on a 5th floor walk up, and you've been moving for 6 hours and you're carrying boxes and boxes and boxes of books or very heavy things. And for whatever strange reason, you forgot to bring your sofa to last, and you're there on the bottom end pushing it up, and your arms are weak and you're about to drop, and the sweat is dripping down your face and your hands are slippery and you feel like you just can't make it. And then Howard comes up behind you and he says, I got this. Is that helpful? Is that vivid enough for you? That is human help. But in that moment, it is human help supplied by God through one of his choice servants. I can personally attest to numerous times when I felt completely overwhelmed by trials and temptations of life and experienced the refreshing encouragement of a friend which brought hope or healing or relief in that moment. And I can also attest to times of great trials when I felt the presence of God, which brought such comfort when all around my soul gave way. And it is sort of like that future grace analogy that John Piper writes about in his book with that title, where you say, well, I don't feel ready to die. I don't feel ready to stand in front of someone who's saying, deny Christ or else I'll kill you. And you're like, oh, I'm not ready for that. Yeah, you're not ready for that. But in the hour where you need it, there will be grace to help you in that way you most need it. And the image or the illustration that he uses is that of a ticket, an airplane ticket. You're traveling with a small child. You've got the tickets in your pocket. You hand it to your kid right before you get on the plane. You don't give it to him the day you bought it because he was going to lose it. But right when he needs it, you're like, hey, here's the ticket. He scans it and he makes it through. What happens if he doesn't have the ticket? Well, he doesn't get on the airplane. The Lord knows what we need when we need it, and he will provide it. And that can be very frustrating when you want to know everything in advance and you want to have it all figured out. You want to know what things are going to look like in 6 months, and you don't know. When you want to know if your school is going to still be in existence or not. When you want to know what you're going to be doing for work. When you want to know a medical outcome, a diagnosis. When there are these things that you're waiting on. You can be confident that the grace of God that you will need in that moment, that will be supplied for you when you need it.